I'm a person of faith. I'm in the marketplace. So how do I bring more of my faith? How do I bring more of God into my work story? Right. It's a good question.
Very good question.
It's a good question, right? But I think the better question really is, does my work story fit into the grand meta narrative of Scripture?
Well, hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Missional Marketplace podcast.
We're back for episode 3.
They
let us stay on the air for another episode.
I can't
it's amazing.
believe it. The high ups have not cut us yet.
I don't know who they are.
I don't know either.
But they're letting us do this again. It's amazing.
I love it. Well, if you've taken this journey with us so far in episode 1 and episode 2, it hasn't been a very long journey yet, but we're getting there slowly but surely.
Hope you stay with us. Yep.
But if you've been with us in any length of time, you know that this podcast, Missional Marketplace podcast, is all about, what's the tagline, Eric?
Well, I'm going to read it off the board right over here, right? It's for, accelerating the Great Commission through the marketplace. Yes.
There it is.
Thank you. I should
there
know
it
that.
is.
Yes.
Accelerating the Great Commission through the marketplace. That's what this podcast is all about. So we're telling stories.
Right.
We're finding folks out there doing amazing things,
right.
whether it's people in the marketplace or missionaries, pastors, all that kind of stuff. We're just having a great time, having some good conversations about all of this. And this season 1, in our first episode, we told you that we're going to be doing seasons, 12 episodes in this first season, and it's outlining a book that we found by this amazing author.
We found it on the side of the road.
We found it. It was in Barnes & Noble somewhere, maybe on the 20% off table. I don't know. But this amazing book called Missional Marketplace that you happen to pen.
That's right. Yeah, or type.
Or type, I guess.
There was no pen involved.
Yeah, no pen involved.
Yeah, no, it'd be a lot of writer's cramp.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But no, the Missional Marketplace, this book that you put together, and that's really our framework for this first season of the podcast.
Right.
And in episode 1, if you've listened, we kind of talked a little bit about our story, kind of set the framework a little bit. And then in episode 2 last week, we
went to church camp.
We did. We went all the way to church camp, which if you didn't grow up in church camp, oh man, you missed out. Let me tell you.
You did actually, yes.
Yeah.
So.
We talked about the sacred and secular divide.
Right.
It was an awesome conversation. Really good stuff.
Bromotactylophobia. If you want to go back and review that episode, yes.
I've been trying to say that all week. Still can't figure out how to say it. And so that leads us to week 3 here, or episode 3, where we're going to be talking about the idea of work and the great story. And what you did in your book so beautifully is you kind of broke it up in these 3 sections, right? You have work and the great story. You have work and the Great Commandment, and work and the Great Commission. That was kind of your outline, if you will, the way that you put it together.
Right.
And so today we want to step into that idea of work and the great story, which to me begs the question, what in the world is the great story? And how does our work fit into that? Can you break that down a little bit for us and help us to understand and see how that can come to life in our own lives?
Yeah, I hope we can do that over the next 15, 20 minutes here. But really, when we talk about the great story, we're talking about the meta-narrative of Scripture, to use the overarching story, the meta-narrative of Scripture. And I think for me, a lot of the faith and work conversation that I had been a part of, that I had heard of, or I think maybe even to say it more clearly, are instinctive questions, right? Or like, I'm a person of faith, I'm in the marketplace. So how do I bring more of my faith? How do I bring more of God into my work story? Right. It's a good question.
Very good question.
It's a good question, right? But I think the better question really is how, and I think it's backward, right? I think really the better question is, how does my work story fit into the grand meta-narrative of Scripture? So we don't really invite God into our story. We do invite God into our story, but really ultimately we have been invited into His story. And I don't think this is a minor distinction. And so when I talk about the grand story, I'm talking about the story that God has been writing since the beginning of time, right?
Before
us, after us, right?
Yeah.
So if we are people of faith, really the better question is, how do I fit into what God is doing in the world? And how does my day job fit into what God is doing in the world?
That's a beautiful way of thinking about it, because so often when it comes to the work conversation, it's, what is my calling? You might ask, what am I supposed to do with my life? What do I want to do when I grow up? Like, those are the conversations that we have. It's all about what we can do, what we can put onto this world or in our story, right? And what I love about what you're saying is that we are a piece of a much grander narrative, a much greater story that allows us to see it. It just, what it does for me is it goes, man, I play a part in something that's way bigger than myself. Yeah. And whenever you can be a part of something that makes you go, man, this is bigger than me.
Yeah.
Some beautiful things can begin to happen.
Yeah. We actually get bigger by getting smaller, right? Like we actually get invited into something greater by becoming smaller.
Yeah. And that's just I love that idea, and that's helped me so much as I continue to think about work and what I do and what I offer, is to just be able to go, man, this is bigger than me, than me. And so, in the book, you actually kind of you put this through the lens of a famous historical figure, somebody that we might know, maybe might not know, Copernican. I can't even say his name right now. Copernicus, yes. There it is. That's a tongue tie for me for some reason. But Copernicus, what does his story have to do about God's great story? Kind of frame that up for us a little bit.
Yeah, maybe take you back to 8th grade, science class a little bit. But really, you may remember Copernicus, or the Copernican revolution is a term that we hear a lot, right? Copernicus was this scientist in the 1500s that came along and said, hey, I want to bring something to light here. I don't think the Earth is the center of the universe. And
that was a heresy.
It was actually. It's really framed a lot of times through science versus religion, but it was really a much bigger story than that. Nobody liked hearing this, right? Because you go out and you look up even into the night sky, and you could see the stars and the moon and the sun, everything, right? It appears that it revolves around the Earth. But Copernicus came along and he kind of messed with everybody, and he said, hey, I think I can finally prove that we are not the center of the universe, right? That we are actually a somewhat small and maybe inconsequential planet. We revolve around the sun with some other planets. But not only that, we are kind of just this small rock in the middle of this vast galaxy, and it really screwed with people.
Oh man, could you imagine though? Like, you've believed this one thing about existence and life and just where you are in the planet and the whole thing. Right. Maybe you're somebody back in the day wasn't even thinking about this kind of stuff, but he comes in and just shakes up this very foundation of what you know and what you think. And he goes, hey, let's maybe think of it a little different. Yeah. And man, that could have really messed with some people.
Well, and the church banned his books and his writings for like 200 years, and it was a fascinating story of how science and culture and religion kind of collided together. But nobody liked this, right? Because it is somewhat offensive. It is humbling to think that we are not the center of the universe.
It does take humility
to
find that.
And so when we have this conversation about the grand story, the great story of God, we have to have that kind of Copernican revolution where we realize, hey, I am not the center of a story that I am writing. I'm not the main character of this story that I'm writing about myself. I'm actually part of, I revolve around, or as I like to say it, we are beloved members of the supporting cast in this grand narrative that God has been writing really, well, not really, I mean, legitimately since the beginning. Since the beginning of time.
Yeah,
right?
and again, I love that idea because it takes some of the pressure off of us to feel like we have to do these things. There's this one job that I have to do, this one thing that I have to do, and if I don't do it, the wheels fall off and everything doesn't, it's like
I'm the hero of the story. And if I
Right.
don't do what I'm called to do, this whole thing is going to fall apart.
right.
Yeah.
And because if we're honest about it, right, that's the way that we view what we do every day,
Right.
and our passions and our what we feel is our calling. But then when we begin to buckle under the pressure of that, right? Like there's so many people that just walk around with almost stressing out over it, right? Like it's overwhelming sometimes. But when we can simply shift this minor thing,
Yeah.
and just go, oh man, we're part of a bigger story here. Man, how can I play a role in it?
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and it's not that we're not important. It's not that our gifts, we are beloved members.
Yeah.
God made us for a reason. He
Yeah.
did make us for a purpose.
Yes.
So this isn't to say that we don't carry a purpose, but that purpose is derivative. It's a derivative purpose. It is meant to reflect something much larger than ourselves. And I love this old quote by Count Nicholas von Zinzendorf.
Oh man, I'm not going to be able to say that
That's
one
right.
at all. I can't even say Copernican very well.
I would say that 3 times fast, right? but he said, preach Christ, die, and be forgotten, right? Like that doesn't really go on bumper stickers very well,
No,
right? Like
no.
that doesn't energize us to go out into our day. It's humbling, it's somewhat offensive, but I'm telling you, Darren, it's actually the way we were created to live.
Right.
We were created to pour all of ourselves into this grand story of our Redeemer and our Creator. It's how we were made. It's where we find our purpose, and it's where we will ultimately flourish. Preach the gospel, die and be forgotten. Don't make this about yourself at the center. And if you want to find some new and redeemed purpose, and we're going to talk about this over the next few weeks, then take yourself out of the center, put God back in his rightful place, and I'm telling you, your work life will explode with new and redeemed meaning.
Man, that'll preach right there. That'll preach right there. And man, I'm finding I need to take a minute on that, because it goes against, like you said, that doesn't fit well on a bumper sticker, because we're all about legacy. We're all about how can I extend my, I want generation after generation to remember who I am.
Right.
And I think that does happen, right?
Yeah.
Obviously that happens all throughout history, but for us to get up every day to say, God, how can I, what does it look like for me today? To simply surrender that idea. Like, I'm going to work today. I'm going to do the best that I can with the time I have, with the finances I have. Help me to spend those things wisely, right? And then step into your day and do it each and every day. And he says it a lot. Preach Christ, die, and be forgotten.
Yeah.
And that's just beautiful. That's beautiful.
And there is this longing for legacy. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a wrong thing. But we were made to pour into the legacy of our Maker and our Creator, right? Like our stories were meant to be part of His. I remember the closing song of the musical Hamilton. It's his wife singing about his life, and she says, who lives, who dies, who tells your story. She's talking about her husband, Alexander Hamilton, who lives, who dies, who tells your story. And it's that longing for legacy. That's not a bad thing. However, I would tweak that a little bit, right? Who lives, who dies, who tells his story, who tells God's story. Yeah. And that's what we were made for. And if you want ultimate legacy, then we actually get big by getting small.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is the Copernicus. Copernicus, man, I'm going to struggle with that
Copernicus,
all day.
you said it. Yeah, you got it.
It is that idea, right, where it's like, that is somewhat offensive. That is a little bit of flipping some things on its head a little bit.
That's right.
But that's what's beautiful about this idea. And so I guess if we weren't meant to just invite God into our story, but we're invited into this great story that we've been talking about since the start of this podcast, is this great story, maybe the next question that everybody's saying is, well, what is that story, Eric? Like, okay. Kind of break some of that down a little bit. How does that fit into what we're talking about today? So hit us with that.
Yeah, really. Like, if you think about it, all these superhero movies, right? Have you noticed now that they're doing like these origin stories? So they all go back to the origins. How did this superhero get created? And really, we talk about origins and endings in the book, right? But we need to understand where did all this start? Where is all of this going? And then how does who I am and what I do each and every day fit into that, right? And so there's much smarter people than me. Trust me, there's much smarter than people than me who have gone into great detail on this, right? This is historic stuff. I'm going to give you a quick overview that I've cleared through some theologian friends of mine.
All right.
I've cleared it through some theologian friends of mine. But really, you can break the great story of God down into 4 main acts. Some break it down into 5, but we're going to talk about it in the context of 4 today, right? Creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. So those are the 4 main acts: creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. I'm just going to walk you through each of these real quick over the next couple of minutes here. But really, if we go back to the beginning, what's the origin story? The origin story of creation was Adam and Eve were created. They were put in the Garden of Eden. It was this paradise. It was this paradise, this perfect paradise. And the reason it was a perfect paradise is because man and God physically dwelled together. They tabernacled. The word tabernacle is the dwelling place of God, where God and man come together, right? So Eden, all of creation was this temple, this dwelling place, and God physically was present with mankind and with his creation. So God's image-bearing creation were living in the fullness of his loving presence. They were reflecting his glory as image bearers and fulfilling their human vocation to cultivate and care for God's world. That's the way things were made. That is the origin story. That is where we are fully alive and fully human when God and man they are dwelling with one another. But then something happened, right? Genesis 1 was awesome. Genesis 2 was awesome. And then we get to Genesis 3. I mean, we're just 3 chapters into the Bible, right? And everything falls apart. And what happened was Adam and Eve, in their desire to be like God or to be God, they actually they overstepped their bounds. So we were made to reflect God, and they wanted to instead be God, right? And that sin created separation. Right? So the fall was about separation. God's presence cannot dwell with that kind of rebellion. Where sin is present, God's presence cannot be. And so there was a breaking. There was a breaking of this ultimate, perfect creation, a separation, a removal of God's presence, which is death, right? So now all of a sudden, mankind dies, creation dies, there's thorns and thistles. There was this disconnect between the realm of God and the realm of mankind. The tabernacle was broken, right? But God wasn't content to leave it there, right? Like he could have just said, you guys blew it. I'm going to go start all over again.
Better luck next time.
Yeah, but that's not our God, right? So redemption, we get to the 3rd act, redemption. Since Genesis 3, since that moment of the fall, God has been coming after us, his broken creation, to reunify this connection and to make all things new again. And that started, if you walk through the meta narrative or the Old Testament, right? If we look at the Old Testament, that started with a man named Abraham, and then it became a people, the people of Israel, and God kind of reopened this portal, so to speak, right? If we want to think in science fiction context, he reopened this portal between the realm of God and the realm of man through Abraham, then through Israel. And before the fall, right, all of creation was the temple. It was the tabernacle. But now God reestablished it first, and it was first reestablished in this tent called the tabernacle that went with them as they wandered through the wilderness. And then it became a physical building, the temple, when they inhabited Jerusalem. But God's presence, it rested over the Ark of the Covenant, right? The priest couldn't even go in except once a year, if you remember those stories, because that was like the very presence of God. This portal had been opened between God and man again. But because of sin and rebellion, right, like there had to be a very cautious process for reconnecting, right? And so this law, the law was given to be a temporary guardian, Paul calls it. It was a guardian until Christ came, outlining how people should live. And sin was dealt with by a series of animal sacrifices and offerings.
All kinds of things.
All
kinds of steps and
exactly.
laws and
It was a process, right?
Yeah.
But God was pursuing. He was coming after.
Yeah.
And so all of this, though, was just a foreshadow. It was just a foreshadow. And what happens in the New Testament is enter Jesus Christ, the perfect and final sacrifice for our sin. You know, when Christ died on the cross, what happened? I mean, we're recording this just before Easter, right? Like tomorrow is Good Friday.
Yep.
So there was a ripping, when Jesus died on the cross, there was a ripping or a tearing of the curtain that separated the Holy of Holies, God's physical presence, from the rest of the temple, right? As a symbol that, hey, all of this is over and now Christ has broken through, right? The temple veil was torn and grace bursts into the world and begins to reawaken all those who put their faith and trust in Christ. So Jesus took what sin had created, this kind of careening towards death and this destruction of all creation and mankind, and he reversed it, right? And now things are beginning to come back to life, and Christ is bringing back all that sin had destroyed.
Yeah.
So that is chapter 3, and then chapter 4, and we'll close here, right, is restoration. Now, where is this going? See, through Christ, God and man can once again be reunited. They can be with one another and together again. God is restoring all things to himself through Jesus Christ. And we now today can be the first fruits of that coming kingdom. It's like, it's spring right now, right? I walked out in the front driveway last night. I looked over and all of the buds were starting to bloom on the trees.
Same
right?
in my house too.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love this time of year, other than Claritin and allergy meds, right? But it's a picture of what Christ has done. We are the buds on the trees saying that spring is coming, but one day the scripture tells us Christ will again physically now return and complete the great story. So we will fully dwell as in Eden. There will be a new Eden. We will dwell together again as originally designed with God. The realm of God and the realm of man will come together again. We see this in Revelation 21, says the dwelling place of God is with man. So I say all that to say, like, I get excited about that, right? But like we live in this chapter that theologians call the already but not yet, right? Like the kingdom has come, but it is not yet fully filled. And that's the chapter of the grand meta narrative that we live in, and that our everyday work finds its place and purpose inside of. And we're going to unpack that more next week. We're going to talk about just the theology of work 101 and kind of get down into some of the more practical aspects of how our work now fits into that great story. But if you don't understand that story, if you've never heard that story explained that way, that is the story of God. And you were made to live and flourish and work in the context of that story. You have been invited in, and your work has been invited in.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for taking us on that journey through that, because that does set up that what is that story question so well, and it does take it full circle. And I guess when you say, what does my work have to do with that, right? It's everything.
Everything.
It's everything. So it really does kind of, now I see how this is playing, how my everyday work plays out into this great story in such beautiful ways.
Yeah.
And so thank you for taking us on that journey through that story today. And like you said, as we wrap up, and what we've been doing the last couple of weeks is walking through these missional moments, talking with some folks that are doing some amazing things in the world, whether it's here locally or all around the world, and we're just saying, hey, tell us what you're doing.
Yeah.
And our hope is that it inspires you.
That's right.
It's not that their way is the only way or how you have to do it, but it is a way that they are allowing their work to be a part of the great story.
That's right.
And so we hope that this inspires you. So let's dive into this week's missional moment.
For this week's missional moment, we talked to my good friend John Barrett from Project Rescue, a gospel-centric anti-sex trafficking ministry that we have been involved with for quite some time.
25 years ago, David and Beth, founders of Project Rescue, walked into a red light district over in Southern Asia and saw 100,000 women and children that were being sexually exploited in forced prostitution. A few weeks later, got a call that some of the women wanted to come out, and some of the women were attending a church service put on by Project Rescue. And our leaders there in the country asked if we could start a home. And, you know, as it tends to be, David basically said, of course we can. He says that to pretty much everything, you know, bar none. And so with that, with the first kind of $1,000 check that was sent over, Project Rescue was launched with that first home. And there was 37 little girls that came into that home, and that's what launched Project Rescue.
Now we know there are a lot of incredible anti-sex trafficking and anti-slavery organizations out there doing incredible work around the world. But one of the things that makes Project Rescue unique is they've embraced that gospel Copernican revolution we talked about this week. They haven't just invited Jesus into their work. No, their entire anti-sex trafficking work revolves around the finished work of Jesus.
Compassion for compassion's sake is incomplete. We really, that faith element, that Jesus element, that's the X factor in all this. And so, you know, that's what we want to make sure with Project Rescue. That is the foundational piece. 25 years ago when we launched, and here we are today, 25 years later, and we would say that is the fulcrum around which everything moves for Project Rescue.
Like most other ministries of its kind, Project Rescue has been driven by donor dollars. But in recent years, they've realized the power of the marketplace, not just to fund their ministry, but also as part of the impact of the ministry itself.
We realized over time that, you know, the marketplace could be an answer to a lot of things. You know, some of the things we just talked about, which is the dignity in providing jobs for the women and children and men that we serve. But more than that, even, there was such a sustainability element to what Project Rescue is looking to do that has really become grafted into our best practices, which, you know, we look at ourselves, Project Rescue, as almost a ministry, an incubator, if you will. And we can start them out and we can help them. But through the marketplace is really where they're going to find their sustainability. Many
of the greatest marketplace innovations have emerged from the darkest of times, from problem solving. And during the global pandemic, Project Rescue embraced the problem, this dark season of our global history, to actually launch and create new marketplace initiatives that are launching them even to this day into new waters.
During COVID, we launched what we called the Forever Free campaign. And basically what that was a giant marketplace investment that Project Rescue made into what became a Project Rescue business, which was, you know, the local ministry that we invested in had this idea. They said, hey, we're gonna build some storage sheds, we're gonna get some livestock, we're gonna get some land, we're gonna grow crops on it, and we're gonna turn this into a business. And we're gonna harvest the crops, we're gonna harvest the milk, we're going to take that into market, we're going to sell it, and we're going to have this sustainability that, you know, that we've never had before. And what's amazing is it worked, and it worked well.
And when you find something that works, you want to multiply it. And now Project Rescue is replicating these models all over the world in the various places that their ministry touches.
So we are in the process of purchasing land in a few different locations now, and we are going to emulate this process in different cities across Southern Asia as well. And we're already seeing, I'm going to look and just tell you some numbers on this. Some of our ministries they have the expectation that they are going to become, within 18 months, 50% sustainable. So for example, there's a ministry that is $14,000 a month that it costs to support them. And they feel like within 18 months that about 7,000 of that can be underwritten through the goats and the buffaloes and the crops and the things that they take to market. And on top of that, the women in the red light districts that we serve are getting jobs outside of the district, helping on the farms, helping take care of the goats and the buffaloes, helping transport things to market, helping with the sales within the market. So it's become this amazing, wonderful business, if you will, that's great that it's providing financial support. But even more than that, it's providing job opportunities for the women and children that we endeavor to serve. And it's just it's a beautiful thing.
It's amazing what God can do through the marketplace when we see it as part of the grand narrative of God's great story. So I've asked Jonathan to encourage you today. If you're a marketplace believer out there and you're going, how can I make a difference? I'm just one person. Here's what he has to say to you.
For Project Rescue, the church giving is a stabilizing point for us. However, when I connect with certain businesses or certain businessmen, I was amazed just recently. I talked with one businessman who basically, he committed in the last 2 weeks. He said, 90% of my assets I just committed to Project Rescue. That is going to be exponentially more than probably we've done in 5 years, whenever that time comes. And that's one person. I've just been blown away to see the impact that one person can make. And I would say 4 or 5 years ago, when we were, at times struggling to make ends meet in terms financially, I just felt like, man, there's just not enough out there. And I look now and I said, there's so much out there to be had. If people can be kingdom focused and they can be inspired to give, there's no shortage of what we can do for the kingdom.
There is no shortage of what we can do for the kingdom when we embed our marketplace story in the great story of God. If you want to know more about Project Rescue, you can go to projectrescue.com. This is an incredible ministry, and I cannot recommend them highly enough. That's this week's Missional Moment.
Man, I love that story and what Project Rescue is doing. John just brings that to life in such an amazing way. Such a great organization. And so thanks. We hope that was an encouragement to you today. And thanks for taking a minute to listen to this podcast. And we would love it and really encourage you to go out, to share this podcast with a friend, and to rate and review on the Apple Podcasts or anywhere that you are listening to this. That is a huge help. It just spreads the word a little bit about this.
Yeah.
And that's huge for us as a new podcast and as we're trying to get our legs on this one a little bit. So share it with a friend. Rate and review is a huge help for us.
Huge help to us.
And like we said in the start of this podcast, this first season is all around the Missional Marketplace book that you've written, Eric. So where can everybody find that? Where can they pick it up? This is what it looks like if you're watching on YouTube and all that good stuff.
It is, some product placement here, right?
Exactly.
But no, Missional Marketplace, there's a link at the top of our website if you go to thestonetable.org. I think it's a little banner that pops up at the top there. You can also go to Eric Cooper, Eric with a K, ericcooper.me, and that will link you there as well. Or you can go right out to Amazon, amazon.com, or where other books are sold online. Right. We've got this in paperback, we got it in ebook, and we even did an Audible version. And God bless you for editing that.
We did. Oh, it was fun.
Man, you had to listen to my droning, your older brother's droning voice for how long?
I've read the book now 28 times.
That's right.
So that's
right. Anyway, but that if you're interested in that, we just want this sincerely to be a resource to you. This is not about getting on the New York Times bestseller list. I don't make any money off of this. This is just about pushing the work of God forward and encouraging those of you who are in the marketplace that who you are and how God made you is part of God's story, His great story, right? Yeah. And so we just want to encourage you with that today. So join us next week, all right? The Missional Marketplace podcast, accelerating the Great Commission through the marketplace. We'll see you next time.